Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the National Ability Summit. I am Leher Sethi, and I'm an entrepreneur and a social activist. I run my own event and management and marketing company called Something Creative. And I've been organizing events to celebrate the International Day of Persons with Disabilities for the past 2 years now. And I'm truly grateful to Varija for having made me a part of a wonderful initiative this year. I am an Indian woman with dark brown straight hair that reached till a few inches above my waist that I've tied up today in a bun. And I'm wearing a dark pink sweater. And behind me, the backdrop is that of a mirror and I'm sitting on a sofa. So today we are going to be discussing skill development in order to bridge the gap for persons with disabilities in the employment sector today. Now, approximately 15% of the world's population, or an estimated 1 billion people, live with disabilities. But neglect, discrimination, and abuse are still too common among disabled youth, leaving them deprived of rights, including those to education, health, and employment. Persons with disabilities are being left behind, and I think steps must be taken in order to ensure their inclusion in the world of both work and education. The employment to population ratio of PwDs aged 15 and older is almost half that of persons without disabilities. In fact, unemployment among persons with disabilities is as high as 80% in some countries, according to the International Labour Organization. And women with disabilities are 2 times less likely to be employed. And those who are employed tend to earn lower wages than their counterparts without disabilities. So this is a broad description of what I would like to talk to the panelists for this discussion. We have with us Meg O'Connell. Meg is the founder and CEO of Global Disability Inclusion. She works with global 500 companies, foundations, and nonprofits to provide inclusion programs. Her clients include Arrow Electronic, Cummins, Procter & Gamble, Starbucks, the Open Society Foundations, to name just a few. She also serves as board member to the global nonprofit United States International Council on Disabilities, which is dedicated to ratifying the Convention on Rights for PwDs. Meg, may I request you to please do an image description of yourself?
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And I'm excited to be here today. I am a 50-something-year-old woman with light brown hair that is just below my shoulder length, and I'm wearing a red blouse. I have blue eyes. I'm wearing gold earrings, and I'm sitting in my home office that has blue walls, and there is shelving behind me, as well as a printer and hopefully not too much distracting paperwork.
Thank you, Meg. That reminds me, I'm wearing really large purple glasses that I forgot to mention. Next, we have with us Rich Donovan. Rich is the CEO of the Return on Disability Group. He advises businesses and governments on how to unlock the economic value within the global disability market. a former proprietary trader for Merrill Lynch, Rich created the Barclays Return on Disability ETN, listed on the New York Stock Exchange under the ticker RO.
Oh, it looks like we're having audio description. Rich, you want to jump in and introduce yourself?
Happy to jump in.
Unleash Different. Founded in 2000 to recruiting people.
Sounds like we're having some audio problems, so I'll give you a quick visualization of me. I'm a middle-aged man with short brown hair, wearing glasses and a blue shirt. My background is featured by an elephant with its trunk up, signifying prosperity, and I'm thrilled to be here. Do we have a way to introduce Ravinda?
Yeah, Ravinda, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yes. So good evening, good afternoon.
Okay, I'm back.
Good morning.
Sorry.
It's been a pleasure to be part of this discussions. I have very short cropped hair and I'm wearing a gray shirt with a traditional Nehru half sleeves jacket. And I'm sitting in a room. Behind me is a traditional Thangka painting. This is very typical Tibetan art that is there. I am part of the skill development ecosystem in India, and I head the Skill Council for Persons with Disability in India. We are responsible for creating training standards for persons with disability. Thank you.
Thank you. Am I audible? Am I back?
Yes, we can hear you now.
All right, great. Sorry about this. I'm in a place literally in the middle of nowhere. I'm in Dharamshala in the hills, and I apologize in case I keep going in and out. It's just because my connection might be lost in the middle. The next panelist for our session is Mr. Suhas Yathiraj. He is an Indian professional para-badminton player, currently ranked world number 2 in men's singles, and an IAS officer, and that is an Indian Administrative Services Officer of 2007 batch of Uttar Pradesh cadre. He is currently serving as the District Magistrate of Gautam Budh Nagar. He was formerly serving as the District Magistrate of Prayagraj. He became the national champion after winning gold in men's single category at the second Para Badminton Championship in 2018. At the 2016 Asian Para Badminton Championships in Beijing, China, he became the first ever serving Indian bureaucrat to represent and to win a gold at an international championship. Suhas, could you please give a pictorial description of yourself?
Thanks, Leher, and hello to all participants. I am Suhas. I am a 37-year-old Indian male wearing a blue shirt and a half-sleeve jacket. And behind me is a white wall with the photo of Mahatma Gandhi ji, who is also father of our nation, who said, "Be the change you want to see in this world." Probably an apt line for the day and the discussion that we are having. And it's a privilege to be here. And hello to all my fellow participants and all the viewers who are viewing in. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Suhas. So my first question would be to all the panelists. And I want to know from you that how do you feel that skill development can help bridge the gap for persons with disabilities in the long run? Suhas, we can begin with you.
Yeah, as we know, every society attaches value to individuals in a different manner. For example, an employer, while looking for hiring an employee, will look at the skill sets, whether somebody has a set of educational qualification, or somebody has a particular set of qualification that is required for that particular industry or commercial establishment. So essentially, when we develop skills amongst individuals, and especially those who are having disabilities, it adds value to them. So we need to look at it in a holistic manner, because the data suggests that we need to start looking at the dropout ratio from their early education, then going into because if we catch them when they are young, they can actually be imparted skills, and we can add value at an earlier age, so that they would have created a path which is more beneficial for them as individuals, and for society in general. So as opening remarks, I would like to say that imparting skills in persons with disabilities would not only add value to individual, but would add value to society as a whole.
Thank you, Suhas, and that's very true and very relevant. Rich, would you like to come in on that? Can I have your thoughts on this?
I think one of the biggest issues, and this will be especially true in India, is going to be expectations. What we expect of people with disabilities. As we evolve our societies, we move from a charity model to a more market-based model, where we expect people with disabilities to be full productive members of society. And the interesting thing in India, that was once the model. Your warriors were often revered as leaders in society after they became disabled. So the expectation was that when they became disabled, they were supposed to lead. That's what we need to get back to. We need to get back to that mindset of disability as leadership, understanding that we need to expect a great deal of the people with disabilities, first in education, second in the workforce, and third as leaders in that workforce. This is actually the basics of getting this done, is that expectation needs to be quite high, at least as high as everybody else, and moving that through society. We find that once business understands the value, they get this pretty quickly, and they can evolve their process, not only to hire the right skill sets, but to value those skill sets in the hands of people with disabilities. So the expectations drive everything. When you get those expectations, everything else follows naturally as any business would.
True. Thanks, Rich. I think that's very true, that the mindset needs to change and the expectations also. Ravindra, would you like to say something about this?
Yes, so I'll add on to what Rich was saying and what Suhas was saying. See, when one looks at skill development, one tends to focus only at the core jobs that a person will learn and then start doing, either at a workplace or as a self-employed person. One has to look at one step before that also, and also has to look at a step beyond the core skilling. One of the biggest challenges that our PwD candidates, and I will not call them persons with disability. I will call them, and that's what I've been championing right since the beginning, I will call them persons with special abilities. There's nothing different in terms of their capability of doing any work. It is only that their learning mechanisms are different. So coming to that, the learning mechanism needs to start getting integrated right from the school levels, so that when the person is in school, they got a sufficient time to pick up certain core skills, which then can get developed in a hard training environment where the structured skills training for a particular job can get imparted. What I'm talking about as an ability to learn is that everybody learns in a different manner. I mean, anybody has 3 or 4 children in the family, and let's say they're normal children also. Everybody doesn't score the same marks. Everybody is not top of the class, or everybody is not at the bottom of the class. Difference is because different people learn differently, and that's what needs to get identified right at the starting level at school, and then starts getting integrated into the training. Second component is that once we have done that training, they get deployed. So what sense does it make for the industry to hire? Because that's one of the questions that it started from. I've been speaking to about 7, 8 wide sectoral industries in the country today across the seminars. And everywhere it is coming out very clearly is that initially there's a hesitation in hiring these people, but once the person joins in, progressively he's able to integrate himself so well in the organization. His productivity levels are higher, his performance is higher. He tends to become a motivator for other people to also start performing. And he has got a very long longevity on the organization, doesn't look at changing jobs very frequently. So if you look at overall the investment on the person, gives a rich dividend to the industry. It actually makes a business sense for a person to hire persons with special ability. 1. 2, it is also part of the ESG goals that are being set up. Having said that, it brings us to the next challenge, in which I've been asking to the industry, and which I'm also kind of questioning myself that how will I address that, is that we have come to a stage where the industry is hiring these people. But do I have a mechanism to take these people to the managerial, senior managerial, and executive kind of roles that are there? I am not so sure. So one has to start looking at those components also over a period of time. That's what my views are.
Thank you, Ravindra. So one of the things that I was quite surprised about when I got into this space initially, like I said, I did a couple of events with involving persons with disabilities, was that there are a lot of them who have actually made it to the senior managerial levels as well. And one of these people, is Mohammad Asif Iqbal, if you've heard of him. He is with PricewaterhouseCoopers. And there are a lot many people like him who have become champions, to others to achieve a similar goal. So thank you for sharing that. Meg, what would you like to say about this?
Well, I just want to echo what the other panelists have said too, is that we are in this global cultural shift on how we view people with disabilities. And with any cultural shift, it can take a considerable amount of time. But we're seeing a big shift from people with disabilities themselves of being unapologetic about who they are and the capabilities they bring to the table. And that's such a positive move for us globally in how people with disabilities are perceived and their abilities at work. So we're also seeing, to your point, that leaders with disabilities are now coming out and talking about their disability and resources they've needed, whether it's accommodations or adjustments or different ways to get the jobs done. And we're also seeing a shift in how businesses are working with people with disabilities, because they're moving from the one-size-fits-all model to truly understanding that everybody brings something different to the table, and what inspires them and motivates them is also different. So companies are having to become more agile in their approach to working with people with disabilities, training people with disabilities, and being flexible in their approaches. So that's a really positive aspect of what we're seeing when we talk about disability inclusion, and shifting that mindset of people with disabilities are confident, capable, and able to contribute in the workforce.
Right. Thank you, Meg. And also, if I might add, it's no longer about being charitable, like how it was seen till a couple of decades back, or even a couple of years back, I would say, for a lot of countries that are still developing. So, what according to you are the business benefits? Because, at the end of the day, it needs to all boil down to how economically viable anything.
Yeah, absolutely. And there are countless studies on this. All you have to do is a quick Google search, and you'll see that companies are finding people with disabilities have greater retention. They stay on the job longer. They have less absenteeism. They are performing on par or better than their non-disabled colleagues. And we see this over and over again. It's not just an anomaly. Walgreens was the first company that came out with a study demonstrating the capabilities of people with disabilities in the workforce. The other piece that is really impactful, besides just the productivity numbers, is the fact that we know employing people with disabilities improves the climate and culture of a company, and also engagement of the entire workforce. So we see people really accepting those with disabilities, because 1 in 5 of us has one. So really creating a positive work environment for all employees. So the benefits are tremendous.
Great. Rich, you describe people with disabilities as a powerful force in the global economy in your book, Unleash Different. So elaborate on that and tell us how that came about.
So the biggest value around disability is not hiring people with disabilities. It's actually serving them as customers. So when you do the math, 1 in 4 people globally has a disability, roughly 26%. And it's probably as high as 35%, if you really dig down into it. Serving them as customers is the biggest value. Hiring them is a good thing to do, but it's not going to drive the returns. It's kind of the tail that wags the dog, if you will, right? So most companies that are successful start by serving people with disabilities as customers and understanding what drives their demand, and then serving that demand. When you do that, you're not only serving the people with disabilities, you're also serving their friends and family. And those folks end up being the biggest driver of returns. They will bond with a brand that gets disability rights in really powerful ways. Companies like Google, Apple have really dove deep on innovation from disability. We work with our clients to help them design from disability to make their core experiences better for everybody. That's where the returns really take off. So while everybody's focusing on hiring, the really great companies are focusing on delighting customers. And what that does is that changes the culture. And it really aligns the business towards the value of disability, and it makes hiring so much easier. So while we're going to be controversial with this, we encourage people to start with the customer. Hiring will follow as a natural outcome of getting the customer right. You can't do one without the other.
True, Rich, I agree with you. It's a huge untapped market out there. of persons with disabilities and their family and friends. So that's something that organizations need to take a look at. To both Meg and Rich, there is an increased emphasis on life skills and independence and obtaining paid employment for youth with disabilities. However, young people with disabilities are often significantly underrepresented in the labor market despite their willingness to work. So why do you think that is so?
Go ahead, Meg.
Yeah, I'm happy to start. There's a lot to unpack there, right? There are many things that influence a young person's ability to enter the workforce. You know, we have a lot of parents who are nervous about their children with disabilities entering the workforce, and often that process gets delayed, whereas many kids without disabilities will get part-time jobs when they're 15, 16. But kids with disabilities often are kept closer to home than kids without disabilities. And so we need to help parents understand that setting those expectations early, that your child should be productive and should be contributing and gaining life skills. I have a niece who has Down syndrome, and I talk to my sister all the time about and she's only 12 or 13. I said, you need to start getting those skills with her now of, okay, start with, you know, you're in charge of setting the table, and we eat dinner every night at 6 o'clock. You show up at 5:45 to set the table, and how many people are eating tonight? And, you know, instilling those basic skills of showing up, being prepared, knowing what the job is, and getting those tasks in place. So I think starting with the parents and of course the school systems and the teachers in setting those expectations of you will work, you should work, and tapping into what interests them. All of us want meaningful work and work that is exciting and feel that adds value. So having those conversations with our youth with disabilities about what motivates them, what excites them, and trying to tap into resources that will help them build skills around things that excite them. I also think we need to, and we're seeing a shift of this happening, of more apprenticeship programs and mentorship programs where companies are saying, we'll take you and teach you the skills at this job. You don't have to come prepared and have the skill set. We will train you and get you prepared and build your capabilities and your skill set. So that's a really positive thing that we're seeing, that companies are returning to the kind of old model of we'll teach you what we know and develop those skills. So that's really a positive. And I think everything that we've been talking about of the mindset shift from the charity model or people with disabilities or group to be taken care of, to the shift of people with disabilities are capable and have skills to offer in the workforce is a really positive thing. So I think as we tackle those, the parents, the education system, and of course the workplace, in really setting a new standard of how we bring people with disabilities into the workplace, that trifecta is really going to be what catapults this next generation into competitive employment.
So I'm going to take a bit of a different tack on this question.
Go for it.
Most disability is not me. Most disability, you wouldn't know it's existing unless the person told you that it exists. And the reality is those people are already in the workforce, they're already in education, they're already banging on a few cylinders out of six, right? But they're not maximizing their potential because they can't be PwD at work. They can't be themselves every day. So what we're learning now with our clients and with various education systems around North America is it's not about finding positions and jobs for a few people with disabilities. It's about coaching the majority of people with disabilities out of the closet and maximizing their productivity. So people are already there. We know statistically that 30% of white-collar workforces have disabilities, but almost none of them say that they do because they don't think their employer values it at work. So there's a whole bunch of things that have to happen in education and in the employment sector where we value those skills. We value what people with disabilities bring to the table in terms of problem solving skills, in terms of different ways to cover issues. Those should be seen as assets. And we're starting to see that in North America, where enlightened universities, enlightened companies are saying, look, we want these assets in our company. We want you to join us and make us better because of your disability, not that we need to prop up somebody because of their disability. So it's a very different mindset in terms of upskilling versus valuing the skills that are already there and bringing those skills to the forefront.
That's very valid, Rich. Bringing those skills to the forefront and maximizing those skill sets is what you spoke about. And I think we all agree with what you're saying. My next question is to Ravindra. So, Ravindra, in the overall population of India, the number of disabled is proportionately higher in rural areas, and it's probably accentuated by the general poverty considerations and poor access to health services in the rural parts of India. Now, the rural disabled are significantly disconnected from skills and the markets. Are there ways and means to change that as per you?
That's a very, very strong point that you have made, Leher. And it's imperative that we look at this section of society more proactively. The youth, which is living in the urban or semi-urban area, already has access to various kind of programs, various kind of trainings, tends to go to schools, which is more with a higher regularity. Others that tends to get integrated at a higher pace or with a higher percentage. But when I'm looking at rural youth, there are two challenges that comes, especially with the persons with disability. First is the access to the training programs. So what we are now looking at doing it as a council, very proactively, we are moving away from the brick and mortar kind of a training center. We are proposing training centers that can be based out of, you see those big shipping containers that are there? So we are converting the shipping containers into training centers, simple trades. I'm not taking into a very complicated kind of trades, and converting them into training centers, load them onto the trucks, take them to the rural locations. Because what happens is that in any given geography, there's only a certain number of universe when it comes to PwD that can be trained. If I have a brick and mortar center, it becomes defunct over a period of time. So this model allows the training center to be used for a certain period of time, allows it to change the trades, and once the universe is exhausted, tends to move to the other geography, which is in the proximity. What it tends to do is, rather than the candidates having to come to the training centers, we are taking the training centers to the candidates. That's first. Second is, we are also, given the COVID, because everybody is now looking at technology as one of the options that how one can leverage it, and India has one of the top of the line IT brains, so-called. So we are trying to capitalize on that and trying to integrate technology into the training components. That allows me to standardize things. It allows me to use various tools. For example, I'm seeing that we have speech to text here on the screen here. Similar kind of tools are getting integrated into the training modules that we are building up. So these are two things from the perspective of the delivery of the training programs. Even after I've trained the person, what is the propensity or the ability of the person to relocate to a new geography to take up the job? That is one of the biggest challenges. Many a times, and for example, if it's difficult for a person, regular person to relocate from a rural geography into the urban ecosystem, it's possibly 10 to 20 times much more difficult for a person with special ability, because possibly somebody from the family also has to relocate with the person. That brings us to a very unique situation that if you look at the entrepreneurship setup amongst the PwDs tend to be slightly higher as compared to the other people, but there's a forced entrepreneurship. Because they are not able to take up jobs regularly, they are over a period of time as they become adult, they try and do something as a business, as a self-occupancy business or something like that. So towards that, we as a council are actively developing entrepreneurship development program. This program is going to be linked with the traditional trade training programs that we are going to have, whereby we're going to teach the person that, okay, now that you started doing something, how you start marketing it. When you start building a product, how do you manage your supply chain? How do you buy your raw material? How you store it? How you brand it? How you market it? What are the legal aspects in terms of taking the requisite municipal and various licenses that are required? So we're trying to build that into the program. Also create a mentorship scenario around this program so that we're able to link this person to somebody who's also already doing the entrepreneurship venture. The beauty of this program is, if I'm able to develop an entrepreneur, two things happen. One, people recognize him for his product, not for his disability. Two, he's able to create jobs for his family members and other people in the society. So it has a spin-off that is much more value added. So these are the two things that we are working on, trying to take the training into the rural areas, making it more accessible, though there are certain challenges because government has laid down certain guidelines in how we are able to create a training program, but we are working in changing those, getting those policies changed. And second is developing a specialized entrepreneurship model to make these people more structured entrepreneurs rather than just entrepreneurs by trying out something on their own.
Thank you for sharing that, Ravindra. It would be very interesting to find out what the results of these training programs are. Maybe you can tell us next year more about this, and what were the results that you found out. Also, I saw, that you work a lot with corporate social responsibility. Now, for the other panelists who are not a part of, who aren't aware of India's policies, this is something that our government has sort of mandated for companies. So a certain percentage goes towards social responsibility. And Ravindra has worked on this. He has a lot of experience having worked with CSR funds. How do you feel that these CSR funds can be utilized for the rehabilitation and skill development of PwDs? Again, pertaining especially to the rural areas.
So if you look at organizations, they have the responsibility towards the CSR, the corporate social responsibility, which they have to impact within their geography of operations. So there are a fair number of industries which are there. If you look at out of 700 districts, there will be just about 100 odd districts which will not have any industries around them, but the balance 600 have some kind of industrial presence around them. The challenge is not the CSR. Challenge is the corporate mindset. The corporate culture has to change from being, evangelistic and trying to, do good for somebody. They have to look at it from an inclusion perspective. And I tell these people that when are you training these people? Are you training them to be ready to join your organizations? If you're not doing that, then your training is a waste. You're doing an activity just for the sake of doing activity. You have to spend money because the government has asked you to send a certain amount of money. It is not able to justify what you're trying to do. The ESG goals, which you're talking about, environment, social, and good governance practice. The social component, just not, doing an activity as a tick in the box. A lot of organizations tend to hire PwDs and give them job which is way below par what the person would actually be capable of doing. Nobody's bothered finding out what he can actually do. So it is important that the CSR, which is directed towards PwD, is able to recognize that this is another resource that you are developing. The development should be focused to be at a level where the organization themselves can start looking at these resources. The CSR doesn't allow them to take them on their own because that is supposed to be part of your training budget, but you should have a program which is very much similar to that and not just a tick in the box activity. That's one. Second part is a lot of the rural youth are requiring assistive aids and technologies. That is something on which the companies are working. And there I'm happy to say that yes, a fair amount of work is getting done.
Thank you, Ravindra. I totally and completely agree with you. I think the mindset of the companies really needs to change, especially in our country where, we have a tendency to sort of not expect much out of persons with disabilities. But that is changing, and that is nice to see as well. My next question is to Suhas. Now, Suhas, according to the Consensus 2011, about 1.34 crore persons with disabilities are in the employable age of 15 to 59 years, and about 99 lakh persons with disabilities are in the employable age group, were non-workers or are marginal workers. Persons with disabilities are among the poorest in India's population, and there is very low access to the present training infrastructure to the PwDs in rural areas, which we already discussed with Ravindra. Now, as an administrator, what do you feel are the steps that can be taken to make access to skill development and in turn employment a reality for these people?
Boss, you're on mute.
Yeah, sorry. The first step would be to eliminate prejudice in rural areas, because this question and also the statement, which is quite startling, which shows that in rural areas, the persons with abilities which are different from others are relatively more poorer. If I speak from my personal experience, I am here for a simple reason that my parents motivated me at earlier age. When I look at guardians and parents in rural areas, probably we need to, as my fellow speaker panelist also said, that changing of mindset in parents of children who are differently able, that is extremely important. The second point is teachers training, because we all come through schools. So the experience that we have in our schools and early colleges, that is extremely important. And government is taking some steps to ensure that teachers actually, because it's at the end of the day, the foundation is parents and teachers. If they are trained well, if the prejudice is eliminated at that level, then the foundation is already there. Now, coming to the next part, that is, how do we find specific skill sets and make them employable? If you take any employee, he will not be skilled, and say a good mechanic will not be a good electrician. So it's the mindset in saying that a person who is not having some physical capability does not mean that he is not able to carry out hundreds of jobs that are available, particularly in a present era, which is wherein the GDP is driven by service sector. Because especially in the service sector, most of the employment does not require much of the physical capability. Today itself, I was discussing with the MD of Skill Kaushal Vikas Mission, which translates to Skill Development Mission of Government of India, which UP government is also taking along. So one of the most demanded jobs or persons with different abilities, they also want to be computer operators. For example, we need to categorize amongst the persons who are differently abled. So for a person becoming a beautician, many of the persons who are differently abled may become so. So it's essentially categorizing the persons who are differently able to essentially appreciate the fact that they are also equally able in terms of carrying many of the jobs. They may not be able to carry out all jobs. They may not be able to become fighter pilots, but for a retail shop assistant, he might be as good a retail shop assistant as anybody else. So identifying this, and now coming to the last point, wherein what are the steps that the government is doing. Government is roping in private training providers. There are government training providers also. The practical difficulty in last years was the government policy suggested that 3% of the overall trainees should be persons who are differently abled. The batch was of 30 persons, so it translated to one person in a batch of 30%. So literally it could not take off. Now the government has bundled it together. So in the whole state, they have created separate courses for such persons who are differently abled, and private training providers do provide different training skill sets, and they in turn give linkage to their placement so that they can show their skill set. And I agree with Ravinderji and other panelists when they say that at the end of the day, we have to add economic value to each of the differently abled person. If you add economic value, then as mentioned by all my panelists, including you, then there is no social responsibility attached as such, because the companies would want it in their benefit because it will add to their bottom line. So it is a holistic approach, starting from parents, teachers, and then to identifying their abilities and roping the government, I'm sure. And one positive thing is the very fact that we are having this discussion today shows that things have changed for the good over last few years. Probably 30 years ago or 40 years ago, things were not as great. So today, the fact that we recognize this as an important thing to sensitize everybody, so that is a great hope that we have in today's day and age. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Suhas. I tend to agree with you completely. And I do feel that it has a lot to do with the mindset and breaking those stereotypes and getting past those biases and the whole, stigma and all the misconceptions that people have. So it is about getting past those up to a huge extent. Now, to all the panelists,
To add to what Suhas was saying, sorry to interrupt, Leah. Just to add what Suhas was saying, we as a council are responsible for creating the job roles for the PwDs for Government of India. So, in fact, we were in a conference call with the Secretary Skill Development Government of India in the afternoon today. So we currently have about 100 job roles that have been tailor-made and what we call is adopted and adapted for the persons with different abilities. And very clearly, he has given a target of adding another 500 job roles to such kind of training program. So the government is very, very proactive in looking after the PwD training. And as Suhas is saying that now the government is also looking at empaneling the private training partners to broad base the trainings that are there.
Just to add to that, I think it's important to note that the government plays a big role here. In Canada, the government of Ontario employs about 12% of its workforce as having a disability. That's the largest self-disclosed workforce that I know of in the world, and that's leading by example, right? So the government hiring people with disabilities is critical to show model so that companies can follow. Because if the government says to do this and they don't do it themselves, it's very hard to have that conversation across the economy.
That's a very, very valid point that you just made, Rich. And I think it's wonderful, and we must congratulate the Canadian government for having achieved that 12%. It's amazing, you know. And also, if I might just add, I feel that it's truly a matter of perception, because we all, after a point, do end up with certain disabilities. And there's so much technology available today, you know, like I'm wearing these glasses, and I have a number, and I usually get rid of it by wearing contact lenses. So that is a disability that I have, and most of us don't even realize that we either do have a disability that we've gotten rid of through technology, or that we are going to eventually in the near future, you know, as we get older. So it's all a matter of resolving that problem or that issue that we have, you know, or the disability. Now, to all the panelists, I would like to ask that from a digital skill development perspective, what will be the post-COVID repercussions? And, skill development needs to bridge the gap between the supply of human resource and requirement of the organizations, since now everybody is more or less working from home. So how do you feel that this is going to impact things going forward for persons with disabilities? Rich, we can start with you.
I think for India, it should be a very democratizing event, right? So you're putting the ability to contribute to a company either at home or in mobile. It doesn't need to be in the office anymore. And that can be a very democratizing event for people with disabilities. It's a double-edged sword because there are two states of the world now. There's a state of the world in the office, and there's a state of the world outside the office. And you need to have the ability to play in both worlds. So that's going to create another set of problems, but they're less problematic than the ones that we currently have with in-office issues. So I think it's a good thing for people with disabilities. I wouldn't want to be a corporate real estate owner right now, but for people with disabilities, it's a very good thing.
Yeah, I'll just add to that. I think, you're so right, Rich, and we're going to continue to see the digital physical revolution happen in exponential ways because of COVID and how our world of work has changed. So we're going to see, and we're seeing it now more, apps for people with disabilities that help them in the workplace, that have job coaches that can be, dialed up and using FaceTime or Zoom or other apps. There's a great one out called Life Sherpa that's making the rounds in the US that's really helping people with disabilities, in the workplace, those that are still physically going to the workplace. The leveling of the playing field, as Rich talked about, that is allowing people with disabilities to participate in the same way everybody else is over digital platforms is such a meaningful way. And, I talked to, Rich brought up the corporate real estate, and one of my clients is a large corporate real estate company. And they seem to not have any concerns at all because their approach is the way that we work now is different with the open spaces and the open environments. And yes, there are going to be less people coming to work, but everyone's going to need more space. We're moving back to the model where people will have offices with doors and be able to, have big glass windows so people can see one another and partake in larger conference rooms. So there's not so much of a concern for them about it, at least at this point, because they feel that space is going to be utilized much differently now. When we have, 30% of the workforce saying, I don't ever care if I go back to the workplace and go into the office. And then there are those of us that have always worked remotely. I've worked remotely the last 10 years. So this really has not been a shift for me. I'm either at a client site or I'm working in my home office. So we're seeing a shift of that, of where people really want to have that blend of work from home, or maybe going in 1 or 2 days a week. And it's really affecting the collaboration and the connection that people with disabilities have with their work, their coworkers. And we're hearing from colleagues with disabilities that they actually feel more connected with their coworkers because, again, the way we are communicating and connecting and doing our work is the same for everybody. So they feel a new sense of community, that they're not different because they're calling in or dialing in or working remotely. Everybody is connecting in that same way. So I think that's going to continue as we get to 2021 and beyond.
Great. Ravindra and Suhas, what do you feel are the repercussions of this in India?
So, like Meg said, life is going to be blended, both in terms of how we work and within work also how we interface. One of the industries that we work very closely is the hospitality sector. And their apprehension is that the corporate travel is not going to be at the same level at what used to be pre-COVID era. They're seeing significant drop in the corporate travel, and a lot of hotel chains which were strictly a business hotel and the corporate kind of hotels, if people would fly over to a different town for a meeting, stay overnight and come back, they will see a major impact. Because the online meeting and the online conferences are proving to be no less productive or no less interactive than what it was. In fact, it is making more sense from the utilization of the time perspective. That's one. Two, when you come to the work-life kind of a balance, a lot of organizations, for example, Google in India has declared that you can work from home till June next year. And they may extend the date also. So a lot of organizations are taking that route. Suhash mentioned that service sector is very large in India, and out of the service sector, the IT industry, the BPO, ITES enabled sector forms a significant component. A whole lot of them are started working from home. Enterprises are cutting down cost on the real estate. They can work with half the space, with half the office staff coming in as and when it is required. So it makes economic sense to have that kind of structure. So the blended learning, the blended existence is going to be there in future. And that allows our people a greater leverage. The person doesn't actually have to relocate from his hometown or even from his home to go for work. He can work remotely. All he has to have is access to the technology and the tool. So I feel it's going to be a blessing kind of a thing for us and for our youth, if we are able to actually capitalize. And towards that, what we are working is we are trying to quickly capitalize on all the IT-enabled trades so that we can train people in the call center, data entries, back-end processing, so on and so forth, so that they can quickly get trained and absorbed by the industries where they can start working very rapidly. So life, I believe, is going to be blended.
Suhas?
Yeah, just to add to what my fellow panelists said, automation has been blessing in disguise for persons with disability. Over the years, if we see how the job market has grown, there has been continuous automation, because of which a certain section of population has always lost the jobs, but at the same time, it has always given way to new jobs. And going forward, essentially what automation or digitization does is human effort is more or less automatized. So the difference between a differently abled person or a person who was putting effort, so now that a requirement of effort is more or less removed, because most of the industries, if you look at agriculture, that is also mechanized. If you look at most of the industries, they essentially have machines to do their job. So that is why slowly the service sector is taking most of the, it is sharing larger pie in our GDP. It used to be 15%. Now it is more than 50%, more than half of India's GDP. So this is a blessing in disguise for persons with disabilities, when the requirement of human effort, the focus is shifted from that to specific abilities which are more or less related to mind or jobs of service. And I hope coming days would be, as we combine this sensitization with automation and digitization, I think the future is quite bright. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Suhas. So we are going to close the panel now. It was a very, very interesting discussion, and I'm so glad to have been given this opportunity to, get on a panel and have this discussion with all of you. And I feel that, there are so many things that I've learned from you guys today. So thank you for that. And as per what we discussed, there are no two ways about it. Skill development is the way to bridge the gap, whether it is automation, it is technology, it is digital skill development or otherwise. But skill development and skilling and education are the only way that, we can fully integrate people with disabilities into the normal life, and also, do away with whatever inequality is there. So I will be calling out the names of the panelists and thanking you all individually. And the team has these mementos for you, e-mementos. So thank you so much for being a part of the panel today, Meg O'Connell.
Thank you so much for having me.
Can we have Meg's memento?
Oh, I think it just popped up. There. Oh, how nice. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure to be here with my fellow panelists, and I appreciate your skilled facilitation. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Next, we would like to thank Rich Donovan.
What a delightful experience. Thank you for having me. Do learn from the mistakes that we made in the West. Don't repeat them. It will save you billions of dollars.
Next, I'd like to thank Mr. Ravinder Singh for having taken out time for us today.
Thank you, everyone. It's been a pleasure to be part of the discussion. Namaskar.
Next, I'd like to thank Mr. Suhas Lalina Yathiraj. Thank you for your wonderful inputs.
Thanks, Leher, Meg, Rich, and Ravinderji. It was a pleasure meeting you all. It was a great learning also. Thank you so much. Namaskar.
Thank you all. I think with that, I'll take your leave, and please do not forget to log in again tomorrow at 11:30 a.m. for the second day of the National Ability Summit. I look forward to seeing you all tomorrow. And thank you all so much for having been part of this panel. And thank you to the audience for having been there with us today. Thank you so much.